Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good evening and welcome to Election Night 2018. Just 2 years after Donald J. Trump shocked the world by winning the White House, Americans are back at the polls, already voting in record numbers for what could be the most consequential midterm election of modern times. Control of Congress, the course of the Trump presidency, our country's future, all at stake. We are here at ABC News Election Headquarters in New York, our political team in the studio, reporters across the country in key battleground states to track the vote and help explain what it means for all of us in the months ahead. This is a national election, and we've brought the U.S. Capitol here to help illustrate how things are trending. All 435 seats in the House are up tonight, as are 35 seats in the Senate, just over a third. Voters in 36 states will choose governors. They're going to have enormous power to reshape the political landscape. And all night long, we're going to be laser focused on the two key numbers you see right there, 23 and 2. Congress will change hands as the Democrats pick up 23 seats in the House, 2 in the Senate. The GOP hopes to increase their majority there. We already have some results. We already have a flip. It is in the House. It's from the state of Virginia. Jennifer Wexton has defeated incumbent Republican Barbara Comstock in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. She was Barbara Comstock, one of the most vulnerable Republicans in the country. That seat has gone to the Democrats. President Trump may not be on the ballot tonight, but he is dominating our politics and our culture, stirring up strong passions and making this midterm, to a degree we've never seen before, a referendum on the president. And we've asked voters as they leave the polls what they think of President Trump, how it plays into their vote. World News anchor David Muir here with that.
George, we heard it so often from the president in these final weeks. He said, pretend I'm on the ballot, and people didn't have to pretend. They went to the ballot today and they voted on whether or not they approve of Donald Trump. Take a look at the numbers that are coming in. These are preliminary exit polls, early in the night here, of course, but 44% of voters who turned out of the polls today said they approve of President Trump's job performance. 55% say they disapprove. But on that crucial question of whether or not they voted today because of President Trump, with the president in mind, 26% said they voted to support the president. But look at this, 38% said they opposed President Trump. About a third there said the president is not a factor, but nearly two-thirds of the country heading to the polls today with President Trump in mind. George.
On their mind. Chief White House correspondent John Karl is here as well. And one of the other things that's different from a lot of midterms, first midterms for the president's base is energized.
Absolutely. And he did 30 rallies in 20 states, George, just since Labor Day. He has been campaigning like the fate of his presidency is at stake. And this is the first time that the nation has been able to go to the polls and to render a judgment on the Trump presidency. And he himself has called it a referendum on his presidency.
He's called it a referendum on his presidency. Senior White House correspondent Cecilia Vega. In the last week, the president also chose to focus on immigration, on the border, white-hot rhetoric.
This has been one of the most divisive midterms in our lifetime. The president using language that appealed, frankly, to the nativist impulses of voters. You heard him lay out this closing argument crystal clear. America will be overrun by masses of illegal immigrants if you do not vote Republicans. We will see if this argument works for him and drives that base to the polls or scares voters away.
There were some Republican leaders in Congress who wanted him to focus on the economy. Martha Raddatz, you spent a lot of time with voters during this election season. Trump was on their mind.
He was absolutely on their mind. You know, you go out there and you talk to people, and you talk from California to Pennsylvania, and they're all talking about health care, immigration. But when it comes down to it, the shadow of Trump is over everything. You can start these conversations about issues, but gradually you turn to Trump and civility and the divided country.
Playing to two very different countries. That's exactly right, Martha. I want to bring in our chief national correspondent, Tom Llamas, to talk about how this is really happening on two very different playing fields, the battle for the House and the battle for the Senate. Let's start with the House.
Two very different stories, too, George. We're going to start right here in the House. We're tracking all the House races tonight, George, but there are more than 100 competitive races. We call these the key races all across the country. And you see more red than you do blue, and that's because Republicans are on defense. Each one of these little pieces here is a key congressional race, and you can see chunks in New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Florida, but in some very red states like Kentucky, Kansas, Texas, and we're tracking more than a dozen races out in California. Now, when you look at this, it may look like a political jigsaw puzzle, but each piece is important. So we've taken all these races and we've put them on our battleground board right here. So if there indeed is a blue wave tonight, you'll see it here. If the red wall holds up, you'll also see that. Remember, George mentioned at the top of the night, 23. That's how many seats they have to flip. And so far tonight, George, when we look at the board right here, they have been able to flip one seat, as you mentioned, Virginia 10. Republicans were able to hold Indiana 2, Florida 16, and Florida 25. Those just coming in right now, George. But it's still very early in the night. We're still tracking 93 races.
93 two races, and in the Senate, a very different map.
It is a very different map and a very different story because Democrats are on defense when we talk about the Senate map. Look at all that blue there. We're tracking 35 Senate races right now. And when we go back to our battleground, our chipboard here, you can see all of that blue. We've already had some results come in. Democrats have been able to hold Virginia, Vermont, Ohio, Massachusetts, Maryland, Rhode Island. But we're really tracking, George, 14 key races. You can see the Dems have 10. These are states where President Trump won and Democrats are on defense. But there are some red states as well. Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Tennessee. We're also watching closely.
And Nate Silver thank you, Tom. Nate Silver from 538, our statistics guru here as well. And your forecast going into the election night reflected what we saw in those maps right there.
Yeah, no, and you expected a big split between the House and the Senate, where there's so much territory Democrats are defending in the Senate and so much for the GOP in the House. And so far, that's borne out. I mean, we haven't had any truly toss-up races called. The Barbara Comstock pickup was expected. But so far, it looks like the polls are telling a basically accurate story. We'll have to see who wins all the toss-up races. But
just remind everybody, you had coming into tonight, you had the House forecast about 88% going to the Democrats.
85%, now it's 81% for Democrats in the House. And in the Senate, you can see, difficult map for Democrats in the Senate. The Indiana race, although we have to know where that vote's coming from, does not look terribly great for Democrats right now. And so, maybe for a change, it'll be a night where the polls got the story mostly right.
Okay. As Tom said, we have some results coming in the Senate. I want to give you those right now. In the state of Vermont, independent Bernie Sanders has won re-election over Lawrence Zupan. Wide victory there for Bernie Sanders. In the state of Virginia, Tim Kaine, remember he was the vice presidential candidate back in 2016. He's going to win re-election over Corey Stewart. In the state of Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren will be the projected winner in the state of Massachusetts. And in the state of Ohio, Senator Sherrod Brown projected to win in the state of Ohio over Jim Renacci. I want to bring in Donna Brazil for more on this right now. And Donna, maybe with the exception of Tim Kaine, three possible presidential contenders for the Democrats in 2020, right?
George, there's no question. There are several of them on the ballot today, but more to come after this exciting midterm election. We have a list of Democrats who are very excited about tonight because they are looking forward to running in 2020.
And Chris Christie, former Republican governor of New Jersey, just give us a sense of what you're watching, what they're going to be watching in the White House tonight.
Well, a few things. First off, they're already watching Indiana. And the Indiana Senate seat, they think that's a key pickup for them.
That's the Democrat incumbent Joe Donnelly.
Correct. And they're also watching the governor's races because what you see there is the exact opposite of what you saw with the Senate map. 36 governor's races, 26 the Republicans have to defend. And of those 26, 12 are open seats, George. So it's going to be a very tough night. And Republicans in the White House are going to be looking at who's going to be drawing those maps in 2020 and 2021 for redistricting of congressional seats. And so that's what I'm going to be watching tonight, the governor's races, and watch some of those key Senate races, especially Indiana.
And so we are going to keep an eye on the House and the Senate. Matthew Dye, you've been talking about those governor races as well.
Yeah, I think the governor's races, when you take a look at the long-term implications for the party, they control redistricting, they control the budgets, they control the policy, and it's actually where you target the races in a 2020 presidential election. So I agree with the governor, especially the governor's races in those Midwestern states, Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania is obviously already done, is the places that Donald Trump won the presidency. And if those states over the course of the night turn blue, it's a problematic situation going forward there.
Republicans.
Florida is going to be very important to Trump.
Big governors right there. Republican strategist Alex Castellanos, talk a little bit more about how this really does feel like a presidential election.
You know, this is really not an off-year election. It's a presidential election that just happens to occur in an off year. We're seeing record turnout like we've never seen before. And it's all about Donald Trump. He really is on every ballot. And he's transformed two parties. We see a Democratic Party that in reaction to Trump is more female and younger. We see a Republican Party that's not the old country club Republican Party. It's outsiders, populists, working class, angry about immigration and national identity. He is leading both parties right now, not always in a good way.
And Meghan McCain, one of the big questions right there is going to be, as the president binds the base of his party closer to him, who is he pushing off?
Yeah, and I think my home state of Arizona is a great example of this. We could possibly have the first Democratic senator since 1976, since before I was born. It's a complete nail-biter between Kristen Sinema and McSally. And I think what's going on in the country is the face of the country is changing, and nothing is more evident than that, than Arizona possibly turning purple tonight.
Not only Arizona, bringing Byron Pitts on that, because we're also seeing the face of the South, political face of the South changing.
Oh, George, that's exactly right. I mean, after tonight, we could have potentially a black governor in Florida and the first black woman governor in the country in Georgia. And it's often been said about Georgia, where I lived and worked for a while, that there are two Georgias. There's Atlanta and the rest of Georgia. And this isn't just about pavement and buildings, but the cultural differences across Georgia. It's the old South and the new South. We'll see which South wins tonight.
Cokie Roberts, women everywhere tonight.
Women everywhere. The gender gap is just enormous. Nationally, what we're looking at is men voting Democratic and Republican pretty evenly, women voting Democratic by 60% versus 39% for Republicans. That's an enormous difference. It is partly a reaction to President Trump, but it's also true that it's a reaction to the issue they care about most, which is health care. And that is something we're going to be seeing throughout the night.
The top issue tonight, Terry Moran. One thing this election tonight may not do, heal the divides in this nation.
It doesn't look like it, and that is partly, I think, the plan that President Trump had. Going into this midterm a couple of months ago, it was more or less a normal midterm election. It would be a performance review on the economy, on health care. And he, after the Kavanaugh nomination, deliberately turned it to those divisive cultural issues where he can fill his rallies and drive his base to vote. He decided to campaign on this turf.
And we're seeing the results tonight. We do have raw vote coming in from those key Senate races we've been talking about. Right there, the state of Indiana, the incumbent Democrat Joe Donnelly trailing now Mike Braun. We're not ready to project that yet. West Virginia, not enough info to project there as well. But the incumbent Democrat, Joe mentioned, does appear to have a lead over the Attorney General Patrick Morrisey right there. And in that key state of Florida, couldn't be closer, 50-50. Bill Nelson, the incumbent Democrat, up against Rick Scott, the governor of Florida. And Nate, I want to come back to you right now because you're seeing a change in some of your forecasts.
We're seeing, initially you saw some early vote reported, for example, in Florida. You didn't have the panhandle in, and that was better for Democrats, for example, than when you have the panhandle. And Election Day vote seems to have tightened some of that a little bit. The overall story hasn't changed that much. I think if you're sweating things minute by minute, you probably feel a little bit less bad as a Republican now in the House than you did maybe 15 minutes ago.
Okay, Nate Silver, thanks very much. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
I can't believe it.
Hey, it's Dan Harris. This is ABC News Live. A reminder that when our colleagues, including George Stephanopoulos, toss to a commercial break on the broadcast network, no commercials on ABC News Live. We're going to swoop in and continue the news, the updates, the analysis as the evening progresses. So let's get right to some of the latest information we're getting here at ABC News. This is a look at the battle for the House. The key number to bear in mind here is 23. That's the number of seats the Democrats need to pick up in order to take back control of the House. Thus far, they have gained 1 seat. So the night is young. Let's take a look at the situation in the United States Senate. The Democrats need 2 seats they need to pick up 2 seats in order to take back control of the Senate. At this point, they're pretty far from that, but we're going to continue to watch it. Many results yet to come as this young evening progresses. Let's go to my Nightline co-anchor, Juju Chang, who's watching the highly competitive, highly charged race in the state of Tennessee, where Taylor Swift has tried to throw her weight around a little bit. Juju, what are you hearing?
Well, the folks on the Bredesen camp, which is the Democrat camp, call it the Swift lift. Early returns show that there has been a 7-fold increase in youth vote. And, you know, today, Taylor Swift came out on another Instagram post and said that the youth vote is being underestimated, energized by things like the Parkland shooting. But here in Tennessee, it is a very deeply red state, and the early exit returns are showing that women are sticking with Marsha Blackburn. There's a very stark choice here in Tennessee between a moderate, centrist, very popular former governor who's the Democrat, and a firebrand conservative, the type who is unabashedly politically incorrect. Her name is Marsha Blackburn, and she has in many ways velcroed herself to President Trump's agenda. He has campaigned here 3 times, and it looks like, again, according to the exit results, that she is not only holding women, but she is holding that key swing group of suburban women. So I know that Marsha Blackburn is in the House and listening and watching returns, but it'll be a very uphill climb for the Democrat here tonight, Dan.
Notably, they're not playing Taylor Swift at the Blackburn party tonight. Juju Chang, thank you very much. My Nightline co-anchor. The question there, will the Swift lift be enough for Bredesen? Let's take a look at some other results that are coming in. These are some of the races we're watching really closely. George mentioned this just a moment ago. This is the Indiana Senate race, the Democratic incumbent. Too early to make a projection here, but it looks like he's behind his Republican challenger. Also, we're watching the Florida governor race. So close. This is another one we'll be talking about all night.